everything all around there. And I called the police after court. I said, they're out there right now. They're out there. They tell me, oh, guess what? We don't come out on those calls until after 10 o'clock. So they can disturb the peace all day long? They out there drinking and smoking and selling and rah-rah. And then Chief Craig gets on there, you know, and he's a disaster, you know. And says, well, it's unsafe to do this and do that. Well, yeah, because you got two kind of people in Detroit. You got the people who break the rules. Come on, two. Then you got the police officers who just ride right past it. They don't live here, so they don't, you know, my problem over here, you know.
I want to make sure that we, you know, address. I think that one of the things that we've talked about in our conversations is that we know this is why anti-blackness is an issue that we think about and we talk about, because it's not just, you know, like what you're talking about are systems, like you said, redlining, and like they've been developed and they're often not acknowledged, they're invisible, but they're there and we know it. So one of the things that we've talked about, not only with our white allies, but how, as you know, people that like we're immigrants, we're minorities, we know that there is another layer of privilege that even we have. How can we be allies? How can we come to the table? You know, because there is this elevated conversation around immigration. I feel like that word talks about the process of coming here, whether it's, you know, through a visa or, you know, it talks about paperwork. It doesn't talk about the experience of a person. So I think that one of the things that we talked about last year and in several other conversations is how are we, you know, how can we be allies to the community? You know, like, I love that you brought that up, that we often sometimes are talking about our own barriers, but they're connected. And you know, one of the reasons why I think entrepreneurial behavior is so important is because I think education many times isn't the answer. And there's this sort of, you're sold this idea, and you're chasing this thing, you know, and I feel that, you know, I was caught in a loop myself like that, you know, going to school, and I was permanently a student for a while, and I finally decided that I was done. Because you get told that that's an avenue and you have access, and you know, there is a lot of despair in the community, whether you're educated or not, and you know, we started talking about that, and you know, I just learned of a suicide in my neighborhood. You know, you know, we're not talking about other groups like LGBT. So all the things that we're talking about, and your really valid points, especially in Detroit when we're talking about water issues and housing and access to home ownership, there's whole other layers of fragility that we don't address. And you know, one of the things that I hope that comes out of this conversation is that we continue to see each other, and that, you know, I'm going to go watch that program. I want to know. I don't know what the program is, and I want to know. I think it's important to our dialogue. I think that as we continue to speak in the community, that we continue to bring up these issues, and that we look for access points into policy, as Christine says. You know, policy is a complicated conversation because many of these policies are already in place but are not working.
I was wondering if we could circle back to the question about values, though. And so well, first I wanted to maybe unpack that a little bit, Stacey. So one thing, first of all, is that our project is not connected to the governor's initiative. So just to clarify that, because he has started using welcoming language, and so sometimes people think that we're actually run out of the governor's office, which isn't the case. And so the perspective of welcoming immigrants and newcomers to our communities in general is thinking about the role that receiving community members have to play in the work. And you know, it's not about direct service provision, so it's really about inclusion at the heart of it. So I guess that would be one value that we could tease out. So I was just curious what else about welcoming immigrants makes you
No, it's the value of the chambers, right?
Oh, the
so
chambers,
the chambers
yeah.
being lifted up and business being lifted up as a system that that benefits immigrants and that immigrants can benefit, and yet we know that those values within that system are not the same, or not at all aligned with progressive values around inclusion, race, diversity, all of that. So not about the welcoming movement, but around, and yet your work and others do have that. I know even Theresa and I have had conversations around, with the Asian American Chamber, and it's being, a more conservative entity than maybe Theresa is. Theresa as a person, because we've had these personal conversations. But so that kind of context, right? Even with the Detroit Chamber, the regional chamber, right? The regional chamber doesn't reflect the values that Race to Equity has around race and equity and racial justice. While yes, they still create spaces as they did on Mackinac this year to have conversations around race, and some say it was a step, but it's still not in the same context. So that's what I mean.
Yeah, and so the mainstream chambers that we work with specifically are in Macomb County, not Detroit Regional Chambers. So I think they're a little bit different. There's still some of the same values that you're alluding to, but they're a little bit more micro-local. So they're not kind of getting as involved with some of the bigger policy pictures. And so it's really about your local business owners, what network are they part of? And so we were trying to advance the message of inclusion to making sure that
in a county that's already embraced itself as a welcoming, so you use that as a tool for that conversation.